In the world of watchmaking, there is a short list of watches that have an undeniable amount of status associated with them. Of that short list, one stands out certainly, and that is the Rolex President. Since the mid-20th century, these watches have captivated high-level business executives, fictional characters, famous athletes, musicians, and of course, as the name would suggest, US presidents, and have proven, even if you are one of the most elite among us, everybody likes shiny things. And today I'm very lucky to have two great examples of the Rolex President. So let's take a look at these watches, the history of the pieces, and the name and where it came from. But let's jump into it. So the watches that I have in front of me, two different references that make up the Rolex President line are the 1803 and the reference 18248. However, in order to appreciate what we have here, let's look at the origins of the Rolex President. The Rolex day-date was first introduced back in 1956 with the reference 6511, a model that was only in production for a couple of years and was quickly followed up with the Rolex 6611 until introducing the 1800 line in the early 1960s. These watches featured the iconic President's bracelet with the three-piece semicircular links with the larger link at the center, which is most prominent. And when looking at these watches, the bracelet is really what stands out the most. But however, the President label didn't get tied to these watches until a little bit later. But let's look at the connection between US presidents and this watch specifically. It all can be brought back to the connection Rolex had with General Eisenhower, when Rolex gifted him with the 150,000th certified chronometer 2 years before he became president back in 1951. However, the true origins of the Rolex President name can be traced back to two men, John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. Despite these two men being the main catalyst for the day-date's claim to the presidential name, JFK's connection to the Rolex day-date is actually rather short-lived, as he never wore the model gifted to him. Why? He was gifted a Rolex day-date by Marilyn Monroe, a woman JFK was suspected to have an affair with. The watch was engraved with the writing, "Jack, with love always, from Marilyn, May 29th, 1962. It was reported that the watch was gifted with a poem and was given to one of JFK's aides. At the time of when his aide actually gave him the watch, he swiftly responded. It's been reported he said this, "Just get rid of it." It wasn't until JFK's running mate LBJ took the office that the Rolex President came to be the icon that we know today, as LBJ wore his yellow gold day-date frequently, to which led many to refer it to as the Rolex President, a term that we've widely accepted today. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the watches of US presidents, I've done a couple videos on the subject matter, so I will link to those in the description down below if you want a little more information about this particular topic. So now that we've taken a look at the lineage and the history, let's take a look at these two references a little bit more closely. So just a couple important notes before starting off. To start with, the Rolex President name, and very similar to a lot of names that we associate with watches in the watchmaking community, are really enthusiast driven. This was not something that was adapted by Rolex, but they did position it in some of their marketing tactics following the fact, as you will see with some of their ads from the mid-20th century saying that these watches are famous by US presidents and pushing that type of language. But this considered, it also leads to there being no true universal definition of what constitutes a Rolex President, but there are some common characteristics that we associate for a watch to be considered a Rolex President. And those are, it must use the President's bracelet, it must also be a Rolex date, and that's just an important note because there are some date justs out there that you might see circulating with the President's bracelet. Number 3, it typically is associated with yellow gold and it can be seen with that precious metal. So now these two Rolex models, starting with the 1803. So this is a more classic example of the Rolex President with a classic champagne dial and really represents that initial era of the Rolex President and had a long production run from the early 1960s to the late 1970s. And then our other model is a Rolex 18248 with a white dial and bark center links, which represents a different era for the day-date, from the late 1980s through the 1990s. But when looking at the 1803, this particular model dates to the middle of the life cycle that I specified earlier, to the mid-1970s. These watches featured a couple different calibers, one being the 1555 in the earlier models, and then the 1556 later on. In 1972, Rolex introduced the 1556 with hacking capabilities, which this watch here is currently featuring. And for those not familiar, hacking is just the ability when you pull out the crown of the watch to set the time, the second hand will stop. The watch features a pie pan dial with the perfect amount of rise to add a nice stylish effect when complementing the lume plots on the dial while coming in with a classic champagne color. The watch embodies the era with featuring an acrylic crystal and has that iconic 36mm case with a fluted bezel. On the contrary, the 18248 has many differences, the most important being the movement. The watch was one of the first to introduce a double quickset functionality with the caliber 3155. And for anybody that owns a vintage Rolex watch, understands how useful a quickset feature is. Like this Rolex Datejust that I'm wearing right now. Very frustrating that it doesn't. The date's never right. But this particular model from this reference dates back to 1989. And you can see a lot of influence from modern day dates from this design. It features a sapphire crystal, a white dial with Roman numeral markings to match the applied indices on the outermost part of the dial, and has an engine turn bezel on this one instead of the fluted that comes on the 1803. This is clearly the more outgoing reference of the duo, much of which can be contributed to the bark center link of the President bracelet that really demonstrates the stark contrast between this and the 1803's polished bracelet, as well as demonstrating the vast variety that you will find in the President line. You'll find a lot of different dial colors and variations throughout the years, and now when transforming into the modern day, you can see a lot of influence from maybe this more eye-catching design. And all this considered, the Rolex President, like many Rolex watches, is highly conflicting in the opinions that will come with it. And there's a lot of people out there that can wear the watch a little bit more humbly. Somebody like Jack Nicklaus, who's been wearing the things for the last 50 years or however long he's had the watch. And then there's, of course, people that wear it for just catching attention, which this watch certainly does. But I'd be interested from a watch lover's perspective. What do you guys think of this watch? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you somewhere in between? Personally, I like the watch. I think it's one of the very few, like when you look at this 1803 example, I think it's, for what it is, it of course is gonna grab attention, but one of the very few watches with a gold bracelet that I'd ever consider owning. It certainly grabs attention. I think it's probably a little bit over the top, but I think it's cool and it has some interesting history to connect it to US presidents and other famous people that have worn it over the years. But leave comments down below, guys. So guys, if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Also hit that bell icon and subscribe, because sometimes YouTube is really weird about letting you know if I have videos going out. So that's a great way to just make sure you can stay up to date with the content and also support us within YouTube's algorithm. And also big thank you to Bob's Watches. Bob's Watches made this video possible by sending me these, and they're also a partner of the channel. If you want to buy these watches as well as any other watches, iconic pieces, I have a link in the description. If you use that link and purchase anything, that also supports the channel and the content that you're watching. On top of that, if you want to also support the channel and find a way to do it, you can go over to our website, buy a watch strap. We have some awesome watch straps available. We'll be adding more very soon, and we're very excited to keep adding more and more as we go on here, but that's a great way to help us as well. And finally, if you want to get some help for yourself, fill out the watch giveaway form. We give away watches every single month. We're going to really start vamping this up more and more as well. And then also follow me on Instagram. Those are the only two things you need to do. Fill out the giveaway form, follow me on Instagram. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.